Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of a hit 1970s sitcom, MASH. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Vanessa.
Vanessa! So, today's episode is all about a poker game. It's all about some cards, some boys, some money. So I wanted to ask you, have you ever played, card games? Do you have any card game memories?
I was the one who suggested this topic, and I don't know why, because, I don't have any significant card game, stories to tell. When I was younger, I would play liar's poker, which you play with $1, just, dollar bills and money and stuff. And, I would beat out my dad because my dad was just dumb and taught me everything that he knew. And so I would, at, 10, I was beating out my dad. It was really funny. I don't know, I really liked the game War. I played that recently with my partner, and that was really, really fun. I loved that. I love that card game. It's, such a cute little kid game, but it's so fun.
I don't think I've ever played War. The only, card game I've ever played was, Go Fish, and that was when I was, 5. I have, no real card game memories other than, playing, Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't know if that counts as a card game. But as, a kid, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was big, and what me and my friends would do during, lunch at school was that we wouldn't even play the card game by the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, a legitimate card game of, you could go to tournaments and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't, read the instructions of how to play it,
mm-hmm.
So we just played it this card looks cooler, I win. It was so stupid. And that's, my only card game, memory. It's just me being a dumb kid and not reading the instructions of how to play a game that I bought 5,000 cards of because I watched the TV show.
There was the same thing with Pokemon cards. You could,
yeah.
There was a legitimate way to play battles, I guess, with Pokemon cards, and no one did it. At least for me, when I was younger,
exactly.
Just no one did it. It was really funny.
They're both legitimate card games that people can make good money playing off of in tournaments. It's a legitimate game. But as kids, we just didn't do that.
We just didn't.
And I feel I missed out on a vital childhood experience that a lot of other nerdy kids had. Because I never played these games correctly.
It's so funny because we're talking about a poker game and legitimate manly men card games, and we're sitting here such nerds I didn't know how to play Pokemon cards right.
Hey man, listen, I think every story I tell on this podcast about my childhood just makes me sound more and more like a dork every time, because I have no interesting stories. It's just I got up at 5 a.m. to watch Digimon.
Well, I'm glad that our listeners have this insight into how nerdy we are.
How we are not cool and not qualified to talk about men playing poker. So, with that bizarre intro out of the way, let's talk about this actual episode, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
In this episode, Deal Me Out, Hawkeye and Trapper attend a poker game that keeps getting interrupted. First by radar injuring a Korean local, then a CID officer that needs surgery, and finally, a hostage situation. Vanessa, I really liked this episode. I thought it was a lot of fun. What did you think of this episode?
I loved this episode so much. I remembered this episode from my many rewatches of MASH, but I always seem to forget how much I love the episodes where there is a poker game kind of involved. Those to me are some of the best episodes, when the center is around this poker game and there's just so many shenanigans happening all around it. Makes for some of the best episodes in my opinion.
Yeah, I really like the format of this one, that it's all around this one time. They're just playing this one game, and it takes place over the course of several hours, but it is just one night. And the fact that other things keep happening around them that aren't these huge annoyances. I mean, there's a hostage situation, but they're never annoyed about the fact that they have to leave. It's just really funny to me. And I like the characters that they brought in. We get the return of your beloved Sidney Freeman, and I understand why you like him now. I think he's great, and I can't wait to see more of him. But there's even another guy who I'm not sure if we saw before, But I really liked him as well. He had like a really good vibe. I really liked the center of this, and I liked how the story kind of spread out around it. It was really cool, and I'm glad that you're saying that they do more of this kind of episode.
There's at least a couple more throughout this series, but this one was probably one of the first. They might have been doing poker games in the past season. I don't know. I don't remember, but this was definitely like the first of this kind, and this one was really good.
There was one that took place at night where like an officer came to like inspect the place, and you know, they were playing poker, but it wasn't as much of a like centralized thing. They didn't have these like extra characters come in, so there wasn't as much of these like kind of scenes of cool guys hanging out. It was kind of like the poker was more of a background element in that one. I forget what that one was. That might have been like episode 7 or 8, like if we go back into the MASHmouth archives. But yeah, I fully enjoyed this one. Again, I liked everybody in the game. Do you want to talk about that a bit? Do you want to talk about Sydney Freeman and the few guest stars that we have?
Yes, absolutely. One thing I do have to note is that I thought that it was really funny that before Sydney and this other character, Sam Pack, came, they were saying that there was a conference that they all had to go to, and it just turned out to be this poker game. And I thought that that was really funny because originally I was just like, oh, conference? That's weird. I know this is about a poker game. Not even connecting these two things of like, of course they're going to say that this poker game is a conference so that they can come. It was really funny. But I thought that this was a great exploration of Sydney. We get it, of course, again, a little bit later in this series as well. But this is just a great establishment of who he is and how like he's just one of the guys. Like he is one of Henry Hawkeye Trapper. He belongs in the swamp, you know?
Yeah, I really liked him in this one. Last episode that he showed up in, and you were like, oh, but that's the great Sydney Freeman. I'm like, yeah, but like, who cares about him? But this episode, I'm like, actually, this guy? Kind of love him. Love his vibe. Love his jokes. You're right. He has this very, this great chemistry with the original gang. And so does, Sam, by the way. I really liked him. I don't think that we've seen him before. I don't think that he's appeared in a previous episode. But I like the way that he played off of everyone as well. He felt like one of the boys, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I hope that, like Sydney, we get to see a little bit more of him, even if he's maybe not as much of a regular as Sydney apparently becomes.
He does, I don't know if he's been in episodes previous. I don't think he has, but I know that he does come back, and I'm pretty sure he comes back as this character, and he was fantastic too. I loved that they, like, almost right off the bat, they were kind of like ripping on Frank, just like Hawkeye and Trapper would. That was really funny, and that just kind of solidified at least my love for these two, especially together. It was very funny.
Yeah, man. Even Klinger being in this group. I mean, I always love Klinger, but the way they kind of rip into him, saying like, oh, the earrings don't match the sweater he's wearing, stuff like that, is, you know, great. I love when they meet Klinger on his own terms, like kind of go along with him, but still, you know, make fun of him a little bit. It's great.
I thought it was really funny because in the episode previous that we had seen Sydney's character, he was willing to give Klinger the discharge, but he was saying that he was like a transvestite and stuff like that. So I kind of liked how they carried that over, and Sydney said, oh, Klinger, you're still trying to get out of the army by wearing dresses and stuff. So I liked that continuation of his character. And also, I do have to mention Klinger's outfits in this were so funny. There's a point in this episode where he's wearing these ridiculous large sunglasses. Oh my god. It was so funny.
Yeah. I also love Sydney talking about various people that kind of, you know, went through different methods of getting out of the army psychologically. Oh
yeah, that was
like
fun.
The guy who pretended to be a cockroach and like only skittered along the walls, or the guy who claimed to be reincarnated and fought alongside George Washington. This episode, for the poker game, as seedy as this poker game was, this was a grimy looking poker game, by the way, still had like this really good fun guy vibe. Just the boys hanging out and having fun together, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like it was the most wholesome yet seedy thing ever. It was just like, they were just being, and it was so nice to see it. Like, this feels like it could take place anywhere in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But what makes this a MASH episode is it being interrupted. So let's talk about a few of those. That apparently Radar was gonna go to this like nightclub with a few of the boys, having his own boys' night, and on the way there. By the way, who is Radar's friends? Who is he going to the club with? I need to know.
I would think it would be like people like Klinger and, you know, the cooks and stuff like that, like the other enlisted men. But I could be wrong.
Sure.
I don't know.
But on the way there, Mr. Radar accidentally hits a local Korean man with his Jeep and is freaking out about it. What do you think about this entire subplot that kind of derails the poker game?
So I thought it was really funny first off the bat when Radar was asking Henry to borrow the Jeep. And it was like he was asking his dad to borrow the car on like a Friday night. It felt very, very cute like that. But I liked this because we come to find out that Radar actually didn't hit this guy. This guy is like a almost like a scam artist, I would say. Like, he jumps out in front of American Jeeps and tries to get money. And at first, like, I was like, oh, what a like crappy thing to do. Like, that's so like nasty, you know? But then Sam Pack, who is the character who's playing poker with them, says he was a farmer before the war, so he had to hit the road literally. So it kind of added that little dimension to it where I felt really bad. Like, the whole scene, the entirety of it was really funny, but then I felt kind of bad for this guy who was trying to like scam Radar. And I was just like, MASH always does this to me. It makes me feel too many emotions.
I feel that. I like that this wasn't immediately revealed that this guy's a scam artist. Like, the way you kind of described it, it seemed like scene 2 is they discover that he's a scam artist, but no, like, first they're kind of legitimately trying to take care of this guy, and I thought his physical comedy of lying in this bed and the arms like raising and lowering, acting like, you know, you plug up one hole and another, you know, spurts water out, that kind of like arm movement. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully that made sense to anyone listening. I thought it was really funny. And then the reveal of it being this guy who's like Whiplash, whatever his last name is, was like, oh, okay. I guess that kind of absolves Radar of committing vehicular assault or whatever you call it. If it was like the Korean Jean-Ralphio just getting in the way, you know? I don't know if that makes sense to you. You haven't seen Parks and Rec. Anyone listening, Parks and Rec fans, you get that joke. But yeah, I like the way that the subplot was handled and how it kind of evolved.
Yeah, it was really cute. It didn't have like, I mean, a lot of this story about what derails this poker game is kind of disjointed, but this was like the smallest bit of it, and I liked how it wrapped up, and like I said, how I felt emotions, of course. This next one, though, that again derails the poker game, was, I would say, probably maybe the largest piece of the episode, where Hawkeye and Trapper operate on this CID officer, and when they're not supposed to. Do you want to discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, this was interesting. This was their, I don't want to say obligatory, that sounds like mean, but this is their usual like military commentary part of the episode, where a intelligence officer, a CID officer, I don't know what that stands for, comes in and he needs surgery, and he was going to get surgery, but then Frank is like, regulations say that CID officers always need some other CID officer present, so you're just gonna have to wait for God knows when another CID officer shows up, and hopefully you live until then. Then Frank goes in and he tells the poker gang of this like CID officer. Immediately Hawkeye and Trapper are like, that is absolute nonsense, and you know, Sydney agrees with them, and they're like, well, we're doctors, we don't really care about army regulations, we don't want this man to die. So they go out and they give him surgery illegally without this regulation meeting requirement kind of thing, and it causes some big trouble for them. What do you think about this whole thing?
I know that we've discussed this previous, that you've seen a bit of MASH, right? Like, you've seen up to about the end of season 3, right?
Yes, I've seen up to a big moment in the series.
So I don't know if you've met this character yet, but this is like a huge thing, right? So this CID officer who comes after Hawkeye and Trapper operate on the other CID officer, I guess against regulations, he is... he plays a character that's like the most polarizing character in all of MASH, I would say.
Oh, really?
Yes, absolutely. And so this is not the role, but we'll get into it when we actually meet him. But there is a lot, I would say, agreement in the fandom that this character, his name is Halloran in this episode, Captain Halloran, is actually this other character, like, in disguise. So I just wanted to lay that out right then and there, that this was very, very funny for me because I've seen all of MASH. I don't think that you would appreciate it as much not seeing
No,
it.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
This is so funny to me. Like, I know that any listener who is listening right now knows exactly what I'm talking about if you've seen this episode. Like, you know who this person is.
Yeah, if you're listening to the show and you haven't seen, like, all of MASH, like, what are you doing, my dude? Don't be like me.
To go back to it, I thought that Frank was being so annoying here, where he literally is refusing to operate on somebody who's bleeding out because it's against regulations. And Hawkeye and Trapper were like, yeah, no, you're ridiculous. We're not just going to let this guy potentially bleed out. And I think this paired with this other piece of the episode that's kind of centering around Frank, again, goes to show that Frank cares more about the army than he does about being a doctor at times.
Mm-hmm.
And was highlighting again how egregious Frank Burns is.
This was maybe... I say it every time there's a new Frank storyline, that like, oh, this is the one where he's the most mean, or this is the one where he's the most evil, or whatever. But this one... Frank was so far out of line of being a good doctor in this one that it genuinely fully annoyed me. Like, as a person, I was like, how dare this man claim to be a doctor? Beyond the army regulation of it, like, I do understand on a conceptual level of, like, you need to follow regulation. Like, there are legitimate reasons not to put this guy under without following rules, stuff like that. But, you know, it's just that this episode, he clearly has no empathy for anyone who he treats, or, you know, that kind of thing. And it comes to an absolute boiling point in this one. I know that he doesn't change because it's a 70s sitcom and, like, you can't have that. But of all the episodes that I hope would, in reality, if this was a real man, I would hope that this episode would tell Frank, like, hey, you need to change, buddy. You need to act a little bit more differently and have a little bit more compassion. Yeah,
it's just like, okay, where are your priorities, dude? Like, you're gonna let this guy die because there is, like, not another CID officer there to oversee the surgery. Again, like you said, conceptually, I understand, and I wonder if that was, like, a real thing. I'm sure that there are things like that, even still to this day. But like you said, and like we always say, it's just like Frank's priorities are just not there to, like, heal. And Hawkeye and Trapper even say this to him too. They basically, like, give him pushback of, like, having literally, like, no bedside manner and not caring about patients at all. And I felt like it was very much like commentary of, like, the whole, like, bureaucratic decision of war doesn't care about people's lives. It's only these doctors that actually care, and there are humans at the end of the day, so.
Yeah, and this was maybe the first episode where being good doctors doesn't immediately get them out of trouble, because they're in trouble because they were good doctors.
Yes.
So I thought how this resolved was interesting, that this guy who apparently is a different character and, is whatnot. But this man comes in, and he's gonna arrest them. But after, 2 seconds of, actually talking with them, he's like, all right, did he say anything? And can everyone here be trusted? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, okay, whatever. He's alive.
He's like, cool, okay, deal me into the poker game.
Yeah, because he's a person, a real human being who isn't a computer, who can, compartmentalize between regulations and human empathy. So I thought how it resolved was maybe not 100% realistic. I don't know how the situation would play out in real life, but they got lucky with this guy who seems to be on the cooler side of okay, regulations are regulations, but there is a line. If somebody's gonna die, you have to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And what does that say about Frank, that this other CID officer who potentially has a much riskier job in the sense of military secrets and whatnot is willing to let it go and Frank is not? It's just Frank Burns, do better.
Speaking of him needing to do better, that brings us to our third poker interruption of the night, where so the entire episode, for whatever reason, Frank is just being an absolute jerk to this wounded man who is, recovered and apparently fine and just doesn't want to go back to the front lines. And Frank is like, oh no, bud, you're going back. And not treating him with any respect or kindness or even talking to him like a person.
Mm-hmm.
He's just like, you idiot, you're going back, you're fine. And this happens over the course of the entire episode, and it builds to a climax where suddenly in the poker game there are gunshots in the background, and they're like, what in the world? It's 2 a.m. And they find out that this officer is holding Frank hostage and going to shoot him for trying to send him back to the front lines with no empathy. And again, if anything was going to teach the real man Frank Burns and not the, status quo TV character Frank Burns, I would hope that this would be it, because this was a real demonstration of how awful Frank can be as a human being, that his actions led him into his own hostage situation.
Yeah, and in the scenes prior to this, when Frank is talking to this patient, the patient says, I can't go back, I really don't want to go back. And Frank says, the army doesn't care about your head, just get the enemy in the crosshairs and blast away, or something along those lines. And
yeah,
he just does not have any, like you said, empathy. And I thought that this was a really quick but powerful line of no one's concerned about the psychological effects of war on these young men, and it's really upsetting and really disturbing because they're just expected to just be shot at, potentially killed, and then also kill other people as their duty, and then no one cares about that potentially they don't want to go back to the front lines, or that they, might have some psychological trauma related to this whole experience, which I feel is why, even though it's not really utilized, that's why Sydney's kind of there, because he is the psychiatrist, And Hawkeye and Trapper gave him pushback on this too. They were like, yeah, no, don't be so regular army about it. You're a doctor. You should be concerned about this patient. And Frank's not even giving it any thought that, potentially he's not mentally well enough to go back to the front lines. And clearly he wasn't, because he holds Frank hostage to not have to go back. So clearly he was not well. And this whole thing was sad to me. It resolved really quickly, with holding Frank hostage in the shower. It was very funny. It was played very funny. But it was very sad to me of he's not being taken care of properly. And clearly there's a problem here. And nobody seemed to care until it escalated to this situation.
Yeah. Again, this is very much a situation of Frank's own making. Obviously, Frank doesn't deserve to die in a hostage situation.
Not.
But within the context of this episode, it's 100% understandable why this happened to him. That he just wasn't treating someone like a doctor should.
Mm-hmm.
This was like, Frank has done some, like, bad things and whatnot, but, like, this was the one where it was like, I was meeting you on your level of, like, you know what? Frank Burns is, like, my Darth Vader. He's the worst. But I like Larry Linville's whole performance, though, in the shower.
Yes, absolutely.
The way he performs is so fun. He's so good at being this very small, cowardly man. It kept the whole hostage thing, like, lighter and, like, had more fun with it. That he is, like, freaking out and, like, kind of crying. His whole performance is great. Larry Linville, always a hero of this show. He makes Frank more tolerable.
Yeah, it's really funny because, like, I thought the same thing. Like, in the hostage situation, you could feel that Frank was, like, actually terrified. So I thought the acting from Larry Linville was really good because he seemed, like, very, very afraid that he was going to get shot. And I liked how it all resolved, too. Of, like, he was trying to play it off like, oh, I got the gun away from him, and Hawkeye and Trapper just, like, turns the shower on him, and it was very funny.
I like Trapper sneaking into the shower and kind of throwing this guy to the ground, and then Frank being like, I did it, I'm a hero. It just kind of speaks to how deluded Frank can be, that he can never admit his own fault, that he has to, you know, make himself the hero of the situation.
Of course.
And, you know, obviously this man just wasn't well, and hopefully he doesn't have to go to the front lines now that he nearly killed a man. Hopefully that makes things different for him.
Yeah, hopefully he can get Klinger's Section 8.
Maybe.
And again, of course, like, not to make light of that situation, like, that's, like, a legitimate thing. He should not be going to the front lines, but it's true. He should be discharged.
Yes. So afterwards, there's one final scene where they're still in the poker game, and it's just been going on all night. And I love this, how it wraps up. Just how exhausted they all are, but they're all still here, and they're all still playing together, and they're like, is it next week yet? I don't even know. I love the conclusion to this, that even after this craziness, it just comes back to this poker game.
Yeah.
And everything is, like, okay, and life is carrying on. So, do you have any favorite lines or anything like that?
Dude, this episode was chock full of great lines. I probably have too many favorite lines from this, but one of the best ones to me was in the very beginning. It was completely throwaway. It had nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but Radar comes into the shower to tell Hawkeye and Trapper that they, like, the guys from the are here for the conference, and they were, like, kind of teasing Radar, and Radar says, it's okay, I can take a joke, and then he steals their robes, and so they'll have to walk out of the shower completely naked, and Hawkeye just screams, I was kidding, you're beautiful.
That bit's great. Another thing that I love with Radar in this episode is that after he hits the guy with the Jeep and he explains this to Henry, and, you know, he's just deeply afraid that he's, like, gonna get chewed out and stuff like this. And Henry's very empathetic and kind of understands, and they're, like, walking away together to go to the OR to check, or the ER to check on this, whatever. They're going to check on this guy, and just while they're walking away, Radar says, like, oh, I'm sorry I interrupted your poker game. And Henry goes like, oh, don't you think that you mean more to me than a pair of deuces? Just really great. I love that line. Sydney had like a million great lines in this one.
He did. Oh my god.
Very much playing with this psychiatrist stuff. Mm-hmm. That, like, every time somebody did something, he was like, you know, that's very significant. I really liked him in this one. I can't pick one. Did you write down what he said about sex? I feel like that's a very iconic MASH line. I've seen that literally on those, like, motivational posters that people, like, somebody on the MASH subreddit made, like, a parody motivational poster of that, where it was like, sex is why we gamble, sex is why we fight, sex is why we have children, it's why we do everything. And it's just, like, it was a great, stupid thing to say, where you're like, well, I guess that's right, to some degree.
So that's really funny that you say that, because I don't have the quote written down, but it's really funny because Sidney Friedman is, like, kind of I feel like everything, right, during this era was based on Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud's work was very much like, oh, everything's like kind of based in sex. Like everyone does everything because of sex, which I thought was like very funny. Like his name is clearly like a play on the psychiatrist.
I didn't even
Sigmund
realize
Freud.
that until you said Sigmund Freud.
But I will say one of my favorite lines from Sydney in this episode was after he goes through all that, like, because Hawkeye asks him, oh, like, Sydney, why do we gamble? And he says that whole, like, sex thing. And then he says to Hawkeye, he, like, takes one of Hawkeye's poker chips and he goes, I'm taking a $5 tip. That was a house call. And I loved that.
Everything with Sydney was really good. Like, Hawkeye asked him, why do we gamble? And he just responds sex. And then Hawkeye's like, but why? And he's like, I don't know, they told me to say that. It's great. Everything about him is great in this episode. I can't wait to see more of him.
Yeah, it was really, really, really great. This whole episode was just so good.
So do you have any trivia for us?
I do. This episode was absolutely star-studded. So I have a lot of trivia on the guest stars in this episode. So Alan Arbus played Sidney Friedman. I had said I was going to save this trivia for this episode when we first met Sydney. So before acting, Alan Arbus had this really significant photography career, which I thought was really cool. He was a photographer for the U.S. Army during the 1940s, and after his service in the Army ended, he and his wife Diane Arbus, who she is like a really famous photographer as well, they began a photographic advertising business, and Alan Arbus's work was featured in magazines that we still see today, like Glamour, Vogue, and 17, which I thought was like really cool. Mm-hmm. So after his marriage and business ended up dissolving, Arbus pivoted to acting. He gained initial success in the lead in Robert Downey Sr.'s movie called Greaser's Palace, which, cool.
Wow. Never heard of that.
It was like, I think it was like a 60s movie. And then other than MASH, he guest starred on several TV shows, including Law & Order, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Judging Amy, and a lot of others, which I know you really like Curbing Enthusiasm.
It's a good show.
Alan Arbus passed away in 2013 at the age of 95. And his two daughters, Amy and Dune Arbus, are a photographer and a writer and art director, respectively. So it kind of like carried on to the whole family. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love that.
Then the actor who played Sam Pack was a man named Pat Morita. I apologize.
Pat Morita?
Yeah.
Wait, okay.
No,
so
wait. wait. I'll get to it. I promise. I'm going to do that one more time.
Okay.
So Sam Pack was played by an actor named Pat Morita, which I know for a fact you know, Ethan, because I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but he played Mr. Miyagi in the original Karate Kid movies. That's like his best known role.
That's so crazy. I did not recognize him. How dare
I had a feeling you didn't recognize him because I feel like you would have said that right away. You were like, "Oh, this actor, I liked how he did," and I was like, "Oh, Ethan doesn't know." I got so excited.
I feel like a sham. I love the Karate Kid. It was great.
So some background about Morita. So he was diagnosed with tuberculosis at the age of 2, and he spent 9 years in the hospital in his home state of California being treated for it. 9 years. Like, that's crazy.
That's wild.
He spent extensive time in a full body cast. He underwent extensive spinal surgery, and he had to learn to walk. And at the age of 11, right after being released from the hospital, he was sent to an internment camp in Arizona with the rest of his family. So like that's just so terrible.
Oh man, he's lived a full hard life then.
Yeah,
my God.
I would say so. So he had a bunch of odd jobs before acting, and then his first venture into show business was doing stand-up. And his first movie role was in a small part in Thoroughly Modern Millie, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh.
Like I said, he's best known for his role as Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kid movies. He had a recurring role on Happy Days as Arnold, as well as several other sitcoms like Sanford and Son and Married with Children. He also did voice acting in titles including Mulan and an episode of SpongeBob, which I thought that you would like to know.
Of course. I think I know who he was in Mulan. That movie's great, by the way. If you haven't watched Mulan in a while, give it another watch. That movie, holds up.
Definitely. And he passed away in 2005 at the age of 73. So then the final guest star, which I think that you also don't know, was Private Carter, was played by John Ritter.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Mike, I feel like a full sham. Like, all these people are great. And I'm like, oh, well, I just like these boys and their camaraderie. I had no recognition of any of these actors. I'm so face blind, let me tell you.
So, as you know, I'm sure, I love Three's Company. So this was a treat for me to see John Ritter in this role. So he is also included in the list of stars that were on MASH before they were stars, which I think is very fun. So, of course, John Ritter had a really prolific acting career. He appeared in movies including Sling Blade, Problem Child, and Skin Deep. He guest starred in many TV shows, including Law & Order SVU, Scrubs, Ally McBeal. You know, we all know that John Ritter was a very prolific actor. He was the voice of Clifford in the animated series Clifford the Big Red Dog, which we love that.
I didn't know that, actually.
You didn't know that? Oh my gosh, that's so
no,
crazy.
I knew, like, Kel Mitchell was one of the dogs. I did not know that Clifford the Big Red Dog was John Ritter, my god.
Yeah. And unfortunately, John Ritter passed away in 2003 at the age of 54 from a heart attack, and it was a very quick, very sudden thing. He was actually on the set of 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter when the heart attack began. So that was his last show before he passed away, and it was a tragedy because he was a very talented actor and was gone before his time. Very
unfortunate. You know, a lot of this stuff now, you're saying that, like, all these guys are gone now, and I'm like, oh man, that's sad. But, you know, they had some good careers, and this episode was really good, and it's kind of crazy that it featured all 3 of them. So, moving from that into something a little bit lighter, what would you give this episode out of 5 martinis?
So, this is definitely a 5 out of 5 for me. 5 martinis out of 5.
Wow.
For sure. And this is not necessarily based on, like, objectivity. This is completely personal to me. I just loved this episode so much. There's definitely, like, flaws and whatever, but I just absolutely loved it. 5 out of 5 for me.
All right, respect. I might have to go lower. I was going to give this a 4 out of 5 martinis.
Understandable.
I 100% understand that in rewatch, this is a highlight. But having seen this, I guess, for like the second time, you know, still a really good episode, but it's not one that I was like, oh my god, best episode ever. But I totally understand kind of just chilling and watching this episode 100 times because it's got that kind of vibe to it where you're like, well, I'm just going to throw this one on because I like it.
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely a favorite of mine.
Very cool. Love to hear it. So, just to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob Freer-Balco for being our technical consultant, Vanessa's sister, Melissa, for awesome cover art, and of course, our listeners. Our music, social media, and contact for the show are linked in the description, and join us next week for Season 2, Episode 14, Hot Lips and Empty Arms. Until then, eat some kosher salami sandwiches. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.